A fire has been set off inside my soul.
This young woman watched, along with everyone else in the country, as a Minneapolis police officer killed her cousin. Tonight, the untold story of George Floyd's family who lives in Western Washington.
When you are a family member of a victim of police brutality, you're like stamped with that forever.
After Floyd's death, she joined the fight against systemic racism, but she also realized she was fighting a battle within herself.
Felt for a long time as though I was not black enough to be black, but I wasn't white enough to be white.
Hers is just one story that represents millions of multiracial Americans struggling to find where they fit in.
A powerlessness of knowing that I can't change the skin that I'm in.
Race and ethnicity, they're complicated. On the latest census, we were given 5 options to identify our race, with an additional box of 2 or more races. Good evening, thanks for joining us. I'm Joyce Taylor. And tonight we're talking about identity and the complications that come with being multiracial in America. In the 2010 census, 61% of those who marked they were 2 or more races on the form also said they did not identify as multiracial. So what does that mean? Let's say a person who is half white and half Asian may identify as only white. Sometimes how a person identifies depends on more than just their family tree. It can vary depending on how they look, what family members they're close to, and who raised them. In the next 40 years, the number of people who identify as multiracial is expected to triple. Well, some multiracial people spend their lives searching for their true identities, and sometimes it takes a pivotal moment. And that's exactly what happened to one biracial Washington woman who reporters Kristen Ayers and Taylor Murphy-Dureski met. What you're about to watch is a story 5 months in the making, a life-changing 5 months.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
We're about to go to a march.
Our streets!
You are a person, you are a person, you are a person, I am a person. George Floyd was a human being. He did not deserve to die that way. We gotta make a change. It starts right here, but we gotta go out into the world and keep shouting and keep telling them that we are here and we're not gonna back down.
It wasn't even that I wanted to speak. It wasn't even that I wanted to have the attention on me or anything like that. So I want to be a part of the movement that's going to change the world.
No KKK, no law!
All these people are here for the same reason, to say like, enough is enough.
Mama, I love you. I think we are.
We saw him struggle. We saw him ask, beg for his life. And they said, nope. There's nothing that could ever prepare you for the moment that you see that.
I can't breathe.
I could feel him knowing that he was about to die. It happened in 8 minutes and 46 seconds, but this I will be going through for the rest of my life.
Say his name!
My name is Shayla Zartman. I'm 22 years old from Gig Harbor, Washington, and I'm George Floyd's cousin.
Our streets! Our streets!
We met Shayla Zartman in July at this protest in Lakewood, just 1 week after she gave that speech about George Floyd in Minneapolis.
I can't breathe!
It had been less than 2 months since his killing in May set off a global fight for racial justice and turned Shayla into an activist.
I'm at the March on Washington right now. Just felt like if I just went to protest, if nothing else, you know, I could talk to people. I think that with George's death, it allowed me to realize within myself that I have the power to talk to a lot more people.
I'm here for George, but I'm here for the other people whose names aren't as loud.
At protests, talking comes easy, but talking to her white family about her cousin's killing and her own racial reckoning would be something else entirely.
My mom has not made any comments about it at all. She has not posted anything. I just find that very interesting still that she hasn't said anything. Even my speech that I had in Minneapolis, she didn't repost it. It's difficult being caught in the middle. That's where I've spent my entire life.
Shayla had only met her cousin George a couple of times, but his killing reignited a years-long battle within herself.
I felt for a long time as though I was not black enough to be black, but I wasn't white enough to be white. And so trying to figure out where I fit in was a struggle for me.
I do love you. I love you too, Mother.
I grew up with my white mom and my white sister, who is 6 years younger than me, and I lived with them my whole life.
And then my dad lives in South Dakota, and he's black. I was an honors student. I was a swim team captain, water polo captain, and I played basketball.
On the surface, it seemed Shayla was living a picture-perfect life in Gig Harbor, a wealthy maritime city with a waterfront straight off of a postcard.
I would say that it is a lot of white, old, rich people.
In a city where 90% of the residents are white, Shayla stuck out.
Just picture you going to school and you sit down in your class in your little desk and you look around and 100% you are the only person who looks like you. Your hair, your skin color, like the actual physical color of you, your freckles, your eyes. I had a phase where I'd straighten my hair, cover up my freckles. If I try to assimilate to the white community, then I will be accepted.
This is my journal. Hi, my name is Shayla Zartman. I am 10 years old. Reading this, it's just like a little kid wanting to have like a friend to talk to. I want long hair and a tiny body. I feel like a 30-year-old stuck inside a 13-year-old's body. Not a very attractive body either. I'm just living. I'm the tall chick with the afro, nothing more. Trying to come into my race, my identity, trying to figure out who I was. I feel like that's probably definitely one of the things I kept inside because there was no one around me who would have understood. Even if I did want to talk about it, there wasn't anyone.
Grasping for her identity in grade school, Shayla cut off her hair and dressed as Martin Luther King Jr. for a school project. With no one to teach her about Black history, she taught herself. It wasn't until she was 10 that she would meet her father, and when she did...
One of the first things my dad ever said to me was, "Oh my God, look at how white you are." When I'm meeting him and wanting to connect to the Black side of me, it's very degrading to the experience that I was trying to capture.
Hello.
Hello.
Sometimes he still gives her a hard time about fitting in.
She ain't black. She ain't black.
Well, see, that's the thing is that for you, when I'm around the family, when I'm around other Black people, I'm not Black.
Her mom, Kendra, rarely acknowledged that Shayla was Black either.
People are people, and there was no black, white, or anything. I don't recall ever having very blunt, straightforward conversations about her race.
I found myself definitely with my white side of my family not wanting to talk to them as much because I don't want to hurt their feelings. I don't want to upset them. I don't want to get in a fight with them. And now I'm like, why do I do that? I'm making them comfortable so I can live my entire existence being uncomfortable, being scared. I don't think so. I think it's time for everyone to be a little uncomfortable.
So in some ways I feel like I grew up white, like I was supposed to be a white kid. I didn't know anything about my Blackness until I went and found it for myself. So whether that be my hair, my family, or even knowing more about slavery and what actually happened, I've gone to a segregated school my entire life. Did you realize that?
I don't have anything to say about that.
It's not bad. I went to great schools. It's hard for me because how much did I lose by doing that, by being in these white schools?
How much did you gain?
I know it was to keep me safe. You were never doing it intentionally. You guys just saw me as Shayla and wanted me to have the best life, and so did what you thought was best for me.
Absolutely. My only issue with what you just said is the word segregated. It was not an all-white school.
Okay, we're not an all-white school. We have 5 black people.
Shayla and I really, really struggle to have good conversations about these really difficult subjects.
Do you know why I always FaceTime you when I get pulled over?
Just so that there's video evidence of what's happening.
And it's also because if I get arrested, I want you to know where I am,
where you're going,
what happened,
right,
so you can get me out.
I've never had to think about any of that. I didn't know to worry for you until
I got scared?
Yeah, essentially, until you got scared. I didn't know to worry for you. To hear you say that it's been difficult for you to find who you are, your blackness, who that black woman inside of you is, it's hard for me. Are you mad at me and Grandma and Grandpa for bringing you up in a essentially white world? There's been a few things that you've said that I've wondered, did I make mistakes?
How could you have possibly known? There are things that you will never be able to understand. In a way, I guess I resent that.
It was the first time that either of us had been very open and honest with each other about mistakes and misunderstandings and how this affected her as a black person being raised by a white mom. I think that she's in pain.
Sorry.
I think she's angry.
It's so hard.
I think she's hurt.
And growing up, how are you supposed to explain to a kid what racism is and how people are gonna hate you for nothing? How are you supposed to explain that to a child? How are you supposed to explain when she goes to school and people call her dirty and call her ugly because she's brown?
I did not realize the depth of it until all of this happened.
Until George died.
Until George died. Yeah.
Tragedy, trauma does bond people, just in the fact that nobody else understands what you're going through. Brought me closer with my family in general.
At George's funeral, Shayla stood shoulder to shoulder with her black family, and in them, perhaps for the first time, she saw herself.
I'm so deeply sorry for her entire family's loss, but something good has come out of it. She's just like a renewed person. She's not afraid to say, this is how I feel, this is who I am, this is wrong.
But we come together, they can't stop us. They really can't.
I think you have found yourself, not only as a woman, but as a black person.
It's interesting for me to grow up all this time feeling like I wasn't black enough because I wasn't in the community. I'm part of the black community because I've been through this trauma that, is directly related to being black.
A consequence of her cousin's killing that Shayla never saw coming.
I know that I am a black woman now. I'm able to commemorate this growth that I've had as far as my racial identity, the struggle that I've been dealing with for so long.
I wanted a picture of a black woman, to have that black woman in her full God body, that is one that has a big nose and big lips and a big fro, because those are the things that have been oppressed out of and told that they were not beautiful for so long.
Looking down, and it's a daily reminder, you are that beautiful woman that you want to be. It's interesting for me to grow up all this time feeling like I wasn't black enough because I wasn't in the community. I'm part of the black community because I've been through this trauma that, is directly related to being black. That's what being black is. It's having that heart and that resilience to take life at its worst and to still do your best and make it what you can.
We spoke to Shayla for more than 40 hours. In a digital exclusive we're calling Enough, Shayla takes us deeper into her journey and her struggles to be accepted by both the white and black sides of her family. Text the word ENOUGH to 206-448-4545. It's one thing when your parents are each a different race, but what about when both of your parents are the same race and you're the one who's different? More than 40% of adoptions in the United States are transracial. King 5 anchor Michelle Lee is herself adopted, raised by white parents. She looks at the dangers of ignoring differences in adoptive families.
I was the first person of color most people in my town had ever seen.
Kim Long lives in Shoreline, but that is not where she grew up.
In Solon, Iowa, which is a town of 1,100 people in southeast Iowa, and I grew up on a 200-acre hog farm. So my culture is literally apple pie, weenie roasts, and fish fries.
Apple pie and fish fries in Iowa? Cultural points that have nothing to do with where she was born in Korea. In the early 80s, Kim was adopted by a white family.
I was 2 years old when I was given up, and I think I was like a college love child. And then I was in foster care and at the orphanage in Busan for 6 months, and then I came to the U.S.
Once again, an orphan airlift touches down at Portland, bringing a group of 24 Korean-American war waifs for adoption into American homes.
Because of the Korean War, there are more Korean adoptees like Kim in the U.S. than any other group. An effort started right here in the Pacific Northwest. Yet even after 5 decades, adoptees like her still face discrimination, experiences her family in Iowa didn't share and didn't help her prepare for.
When you were growing up, did you ever feel out of place?
All of the time.
Right, like I knew that answer.
And it's still happening. Kim just had her first baby Juniper, and at the very first visit to the pediatrician, a microaggression, a subtle discriminatory act, smacked her in the face. The office staff assumed her name wasn't Kim Long, and they actually changed it to Kim Wong.
Nowhere on our records was there Wong. I'm Kim. Long is a German name, actually. It's from my parents. And then they clocked me and changed it only for me to Kimberly Wong.
That racist assumption is the type of encounter her family back in Iowa didn't realize they needed to help her navigate. Back then, adoption agencies told families to raise a child ignoring differences and the cultures they came from.
We didn't have discussions about race. We didn't talk about it. We didn't, say, hey, were there any microaggressions that happened today? It wasn't a thing that we ever talked about, right? It was assimilate, assimilate, assimilate. Pretend like there's no difference.
It's hard to walk around every day and have people see a black woman, but for me not to even feel like a black woman.
A white family in Bellingham adopted Angela Tucker out of foster care.
One of the big points that I have highlighted is you said, me telling them that I'm adopted is not going to help me, and it won't help them understand me either.
She's now a transracial adoption specialist who helps adoptees across the country embrace their unique stories.
It's really dangerous for Black and brown transracial adoptees to not embrace their Blackness and understand what that means in the context of today's world. Okay, Juhi.
She means if you are an adoptee who's been assimilated, ill-prepared for how the outside world may perceive you, it could cost you your life.
I am mentoring a transracially adopted 13-year-old girl who lives in a predominantly white space. And she told me this really interesting story. After George Floyd was murdered, she had gone to hang out with a girlfriend who's a Black friend with Black parents, is not adopted, and that friend's parents was giving her the talk, a lecture about how to act around the police. And my mentee was witnessing that and being like, wow, her parents are really coming down on her hard in a way that was loving still. And then she went back to her house and her white parents were really hesitant to talk about George Floyd or police brutality. And when they did, she said they talked about it with kind of tears in their eyes and said, I'm so sorry that this is the reality. I'm so sorry that you're gonna have to deal with this. And so this, my mentee was recognizing and said to me, like, I don't know if I'm prepared to be a Black woman in society as I grow up because my parents aren't telling me the same level of the truth of what I saw my Black friend and Black parents tell her. I thought that was really insightful and almost unavoidable, which is why I recommend that white parents of Black kids outsource some of the parenting duties.
So I do think that that is a very interesting point to try to outsource some of the parenting, but then
it's tricky.
It's just tricky, right?
It's tricky because people are like, well, it's like I'm hiring the help. Like, go find a Black person. And for some white adoptive parents, they don't have a community around them that is diverse. So they don't have like a good friend or a neighbor that they can ask to come chat with my kid about this or that. That's also problematic. If you don't have those people in your lives and you really have to seek them out, then that also tells me that your world isn't diverse, which that is not safe for the kids.
You can love your children and still participate in their oppression through the language you use.
Angela's latest project, launched during the pandemic, is her podcast called The Adoptee Next Door. It sheds light on topics like birth reunions and mental health, and now the very hot topic of adoptive parents as white saviors. The idea that white families are heroes for adopting children who are often poor and of color.
Oh, well, you would have been growing up in abject poverty, and here you are, this wonderful life that I'm going to give you, while completely ignoring that they are not going to experience the world the way you do.
But my work, I'm trying so hard to say, who are adoptees outside of what their parents did or thought or didn't do or said? You know,
work being done now in the adoption community tries to honor the lives adoptees actually live, floating between identities and navigating a world that doesn't always see them for who they really are. Kim says she'll make sure her daughter is raised differently, and it starts with talking about race.
I absolutely will do that with Juniper, because I think not talking about it was the problem.
What do you think? Kim Long isn't waiting around for the world to change. She's making sure she's seen for who she really is, even with something as small as a doctor's bill, the one addressed to Kim Wong.
I still haven't paid that bill, by the way. I can't. I'm not a person who doesn't pay bills, and I just can't send him the check. So even now, I mean, it's the microaggressions like that.
We've heard some powerful stories. So what can parents do if they adopt a child of another race or have a multiracial child? We asked Karina Hooks, a Washington-based race educator and certified life coach.
So I would say first and foremost, please notice race, notice difference, and start to normalize that in your family. You want to make sure that you're reading books and making sure that your kids have a multicultural experience, starting from as early as you can remember. It is the community you're around. It's allowing people into your circle that your kid could potentially identify with or ask those cultural questions. It's making sure that you, as the adult in their lives, provide an open space for them to talk about the challenges, to talk about the things that may come up for them that they just can't make sense of. Be on the journey with your child or your loved one. Please don't see yourself outside of their journey, because it is much more effective to know that they're walking with you and not walking alone.
To see more of Karina Hooks' interview, go to king5.com/facingrace. During the past several weeks, we've tried to look at race and inclusion from many different points of view. And soon we will be turning the cameras on ourselves. Chris Ingalls gives us a preview of a future Facing Race story that looks at King 5's internal struggles with race in the workplace and on television.
Black lives matter!
In late May, many of you first heard about the death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police right here on King 5.
Well, tonight, a second round of protests across Minneapolis after the death of George Floyd, a black man.
That same week, by coincidence, King 5 management held a long-planned diversity workshop for King employees. While we usually talk on TV about other people's stories of racial bias, this Zoom session was about ours.
I think we'd all like to think that we're very enlightened, but I learn almost on a daily basis that I'm not as enlightened as I think I am.
Our general manager said those words just as the weight of George Floyd's death was being felt across America.
What were the messages that you received about race?
It was more or less awareness of how the world sees me and the threats that come along with it because I'm a black male.
Jesse Wilson, an account executive in King 5's sales department, talked about growing up as the only black kid in a mostly white neighborhood. Now, he's the only African American among King's mostly white sales staff.
There's a lot of different places, a lot of different situations, a lot of different times where people aren't comfortable, and that happens at King 5 as well.
And I'm just going to be so honest right now.
You're going to talk about our boys now, aren't you? About how we have different fears about our children.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
I've never had to have a discussion with my boys about what to do if the cops pull them over.
Yeah.
Our anchors were talking about race not just on the air, but behind the scenes with personal stories.
I faced a lot of discrimination growing up as a kid. And I think the message to me from my family and parents and culture was that you didn't speak up, and that if you suffered, you were in somebody else's country.
Words that some had never spoken.
In my whole adult life, I had never talked with friends about it, with colleagues about it, and it shocked me to realize in that moment, this was the first time I'm talking about my own experiences.
The question for King 5, are we doing enough to include people of color in our building and on the air?
People of color in general, but let's talk about Asian Americans who are on TV. I mean, sound bites, people who are in authority, man on the street, anything, families that are featured, kids, teachers. Whatever story we're covering, let's just look at air checks over the last 30 days and see how many people of color appear on our air. It's shocking if you think about it, because there's very, very few.
Chris's story will air as part of our new Facing Race unit here at King 5, devoted to continuing our reporting on race and equity in the Pacific Northwest. And as part of our commitment, we want to hear your experiences and your story ideas. Send your emails to race@king5.com, and you'll see these stories as part of our newscast starting in early 2021. As we close out this unforgettable year, it's hard to measure how it's moved and changed us. After the death of George Floyd in May and the demand for justice and reform that followed, we at King 5 knew it was time to not just talk about race, but to address the racism and the inequities that impact all of us, especially people of color. We want to thank you for making that possible, for trusting us to share your personal stories. Maria told us that our program validated that it's okay to feel uncomfortable, to not have answers, or to only just begin coming to terms with the reality of racial inequality. Michelle said, calm, reasonable discussion about race is exactly what our society needs right now. And Gary wrote to tell us, I think about racial difference a lot, and in a moment of personal insight several months ago, I concluded that I am not privileged because I am white. I am privileged because I am not black. He said our show was not only illuminating, but healing. To all of you who have reached out to us, we are grateful. And we hope that you have learned as much from Facing Race as we have. From all of us here at King 5, a heartfelt thank you for joining us for this original series, with many more stories to come. Good night.